Good evening, bonsoir à tous. I am Anna Basile, Division Manager with Ottawa Public Library. We believe it is important to acknowledge that even as we gather virtually, we are on the unceded and ancestral territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin people. Nous rendons hommage à toutes les Premières Nations, les Inuits et les Métis, leurs aînés, leurs ancêtres, et leurs importantes contributions passées et présentes. It is a pleasure to welcome you on behalf of Ottawa Public Library to this evening's program in partnership with the Ottawa International Writers Festival. Our guest author this evening is Jen Sookfong Lee. Her books include The Conjoined, which was nominated for the International Dublin Literary Award and was a finalist for the Ethel Wilson Fiction Prize. The Better Mother, a finalist for the City of Vancouver Book Award, as well as The End of East, Gentlemen of the Shade, and Chinese New Year. Jen currently teaches at the Writers Studio Online with Simon Fraser University. She also edits fiction for Woolsack and Wynne Buckrider Books and co-hosts the literary podcast, Can't Lit. She is here tonight to discuss her latest book, The Shadow List, described by fellow Canadian writer Zoe Whittall as an addictive read from start to finish. It is not your typical book of poetry. Jen has a novelist's way with character in her work. She builds a deep connection with the narrator of the poems, and each poem creates a vivid snapshot of moments most of us will recognize. Moments like the slick of black ice, the killing light of day, cheap plastic diamonds. They are all pieces of a life we gather and put in our pockets to remember. This evening's event is part of the library's Asian Heritage Month lineup, and we encourage you to visit our website for details on the various programs that we have on offer, as well as book lists and other resources. It is now my pleasure to hand things over to Sean Wilson, Artistic Director of the Ottawa International Writers Festival. Bonsoir, good evening, and enjoy.
Thank you, Anna. Good evening, everyone. I am also broadcasting from the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe, and I'm so thrilled to welcome you all to the Writers Festival's 2021 virtual season and to thank our friends at the Ottawa Public Library for their ongoing collaboration. I also want to thank you for supporting authors and booksellers through these difficult times. Our official bookseller is Perfect Books on Elgin Street, but I know that wherever you are right now, there's a fantastic independent bookseller nearby who would be more than happy to sell you some great books. Our spring season continues into June, and it's all available online, free and on demand, so just visit writersfestival.org and click play. If you enjoy this event or any of our virtual programming, please consider making a charitable donation. Your financial support will allow us to continue to bring you the world's most interesting authors and thinkers, even as we continue our second year of the pandemic. Our host, Ellen Chang-Richardson, is an award-winning poet with 3 chapbooks to her credit. She's also the founder of Little Birds Poetry and a member of the poetry collective 7, as well as co-founder of Riverbed Reading Series, which kicks off its 2nd season this Wednesday at 7:30 Eastern Time. Let's give Ellen a warm virtual welcome.
Thank you, Sean. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and kicking off the spring season of the Writers Fest. I am also streaming in from Ottawa, Ontario, better known as the unceded ancestral territories of the Algonquin Anishinaabe. And joining me tonight is Jen. Hi, Jen.
Hello, Ellen.
I'm so excited to be sitting down with you today. We're here to chat about your debut poetry collection, which, if you haven't picked it up yet, is called The Shadow List.
Which way does it go? Nobody knows.
No, all sorts of ways, trust me, inside and out.
Yeah.
But I do also hope that we can chat about other things too, including your newest children's book, which is also out recently. It's called Finding Home, The Journey of Immigrants and Refugees, both of which are available, everyone, from the Ottawa Public Library. I actually did a search, and through your local independent. So before you start, actually, I would love for Jen to give us a 5-minute reading from her book. Please take it away.
Yeah, let's do that. My poems can be quite long, so it's not going to be like many poems. It's just going to be a few. The first one I'm going to read is called Infestation. In the kitchen, they hang upside down on the ceiling, wings folded, their bodies tucked like arrowheads, antennae quivering so slightly you have to stand on a chair and squint to see any movement at all. In the bedroom, at night, they fly around your reading lamp, and you can hear their exoskeletons singe on the hot light bulb as you open book after book without finishing any. You burrow deep in your closet looking for abandoned cocoons in your sweater pile, open every container in your pantry until you find larvae in the quinoa. You swear they are pulsating like they already know how to breathe. It figures, you think, trying to eat healthy results in a plague. Steel-cut oats, pearled barley, brown rice, all in their clear containers so they can judge you from within. You compost them without regret. The traps emit pheromones. You stay up half the night watching the moths circle the trap that smells like sex, the trap that will lure them in with the heady scent of moth desire. They will fly in, land on the adhesive, and never escape. They last 4, maybe 5 days before they stop struggling and die, their tiny moth feet covered in an unforgiving glue. This satisfies you. Where they have come from, you don't know, but you create an origin story in your head. The elderly Chinese couple next door, you think, it must be them. Maybe they keep dry goods in their bedroom, drywall the only thing separating your headboard from theirs. You remember that time you cleaned out your mother's house and found a dozen bottles of soy sauce and 7 packages of dried cloud ear fungus hidden behind the coats in the closet. What if there is a shelf of mung beans and jasmine rice right behind your pillows? There, the moths build cocoons, hatch, and then fly off into your open window, straight toward your bedside lamp. The moths know. This is why they have come to you, toward the only light in a dark building, toward the promise of sex and a long, sticky death. They know you read at night. They know you are alone. They know you itch with loneliness until you could scream, so you read and fail until you fall asleep. So for this portion, I'm going to read, I think, one more poem, and then we'll get to 5 minutes. This one is called Detritus. I don't actually say that word out loud a lot. I'm never confident that I'm pronouncing it properly. It's okay.
I think you're good. That's actually
it's one of those words, right, that like nobody ever says out loud.
I know aluminium, detritus.
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 Divisive. I don't know. Okay. In your son's pockets, you find the following: maple leaves, dried, pebbles from the schoolyard, a dove feather, a plastic sapphire. Fallen, he whispers, from the queen's crown. What you never talk about. The glitter he once collected from the basement of your last house, spilled across the concrete floor from a box of loose Christmas ornaments you dropped in your hurry to decorate a living room you knew you would soon leave. Then he had swept the sparkly dust into an egg cup with his chubby hands and placed it on the mantel, the same mantel you would punch during a fight that sparked a fire in your chest, that burned through the sinews in your shoulders and arms until your knuckles hit the stained oak and you were left with swollen hands until New Year's Eve. Maybe the champagne fixed everything, but you know that's not true. Your chest aches when you think of that house, the tall ceilings, the plaster walls, cool to the touch. The egg cup sits on a shelf in your son's new room, dusty now behind a pile of ball caps. If he ever looks at it, he doesn't say. I'm going to stop there. Thanks.
Oh, thank you so much. Some of my favorite lines from the two that you read are just drywall, the only thing that separates your headboard from theirs. Because I've laid in my bed before and thought to myself, what's going on the other side?
Just right there. My office is my bedroom, if anyone can see. So that's the drywall.
We're going to get to that in a second, actually, that use of voice that's very just so straightforward. And so I don't want to use the word banal, but it's kind of like a good banal. You know what I mean? It's like this is matter of fact. And that's, this is my life. And that's what you're gonna get into right now, which is part of my favorite stuff about narrative poetry, but we'll get there. Okay. I want to start first with, how you mentioned in a recent episode of Can't Lit, which I subscribe to. I love it. It's fun. That setting is probably the most important tool for you when it comes to writing fiction, and that it's a tool that you actually use quite a bit in this collection. I was wondering if you could touch upon that and how it fuels the undertones of the book.
Yeah, I mean, for me, setting has always meant, I think all of my books, except for, some of the kids' books have been set in Vancouver. What we know as Vancouver, which is actually the unceded and traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, I should say. Vancouver to me is a really curious place. I always think of it as the last place that people go to before they fall off the edge of the world. But also it's a place where it's a port city. So there's a long history of like sort of resource economy and also vice, things like sex trafficking, drugs, all of that stuff. But if you come to Vancouver and you're just a visitor, it's like beautiful, right? There's like beautiful tall glass towers. The mountains are so blue. The ocean is so blue. Everything's so nice. And yet that undercurrent of poverty, of the immigrant working class who can never really get anywhere, all of that is still there. So setting for me in Vancouver has always been really rich. And I think sort of the themes that I'm always sort of working around, which is sort of class, but also like feminism and also the body, all of that to me is so obviously connected to setting. If there is no setting, the setting always has to reflect whatever it is that my narrator or my character is thinking or feeling. And like Vancouver's really easy to pick a bunch of stuff that is like, it rains a lot, you can be gloomy. It's like, but more than that too, I think that the setting can also, change a person and really change how we see the world. It really changes how we even I think even kind of physically grow into our own bodies. So that's a very long-winded explanation for my
I love it.
obsession.
It actually makes me think though, I'm currently in Ottawa, and when people come to Ottawa and they visit, it's very quiet. It's a beautiful city. It's lots of nature interwoven, but underneath that, so my day job is in criminal administration at the Ottawa courthouse. And
Okay, interesting.
Drowning in paper is all I can say. So yeah, I get that. When you visit a place, and I've been to Vancouver before, it is very gorgeous. Like you're standing on the side of the pier, and the Pacific wind is hitting your face, and you're just looking out like, holy crap, this is beautiful. And then you remember that maybe three streets down, biggest site of terrible crime, and that sort of thing. So, but I like that you really dive into that throughout your previous books as well as in this. There's something in this new debut collection of it's your debut collection of poetry.
My debut collection at 44 years old. It can still be done, everyone.
It's very raw, and that's what drew me into it. It's very different from a lot of the other poetry that I'm reading these days, in the sense that it is just so real, and that comes through that narrator's voice. I want to talk about that. It's AAPI, Asian American Pacific Islander / Asian / South Asian / Southeast Asian Heritage Month. Yay. We should be aware of the issues that face Asian communities. So 365 days out of the year in my mind. But I do want to touch on how Asian writers like you and I are often corralled into this specific niche of having to talk about trauma or intergenerational trauma, or we might have to talk about more like soft Orientalist things like, tapestries and porcelain. I'm pushing out of that mold in my own writing. A lot of writers that I know who are BIPOC are also pushing out of that. And I love that your narrator here does that too. Can you talk a bit about that journey for yourself?
Yeah, that was a real journey for me, like a long journey. When I started writing my first novel, The End of East, which is a multi-generational sort of immigrant trauma story in some ways. And I had never, as a younger writer, I had never envisioned that would be the sort of thing that I would write. It never occurred to me that I would. And what ended up happening is that I started reimagining my grandparents' lives specifically, and then the book, as it turns out, was my alpha story, and it came out. And then what just ended up happening is that novel fit in a lot of ways into what people wanted out of like Asian Canadian female writers specifically, or women of the Asian diaspora. So it was useful for me at that point. But I started writing a second novel that never got published, and part of the reason it never got published is because there were no Asian themes in it. We sent it out, it got rejected, and everybody declined it. It was a very strange novel. I was trying my hand at sort of this kind of like time travel specky sort of situation. And maybe it's
No.
it's probably good. It didn't get published because I don't think it was ready, but it's fine. I was not the right time for it, but for me. But then I went through this whole thing of like, what have I been writing? If this gets declined, what on earth does an editor will say who declined it that it's not capitalizing on my audience and I should be writing on the themes that people expect me to write on. And I thought, what does that even mean? And would you say that to like, I don't know, Chuck Palahniuk, or would you say that to like Cormac McCarthy? I don't think you would. So then as time went on, I started to explore themes. Obviously, race is really important to me. Obviously, my Chinese heritage is really important to me. And I wanted to write books where, to echo what you said earlier, where our identity as racialized people is matter of fact. It's part of who we are. We walk through lives. I walk through life with this face. Everybody knows I'm Asian. Like I can't real pat. My son said to me recently, he said, hey, maybe that guy doesn't know you're Asian. And I said, I don't think that's a possibility. This face is my face. I cannot change it. So it was really funny. I thought it was cute. But it's just that with the conjoined even, it was very much their, the characters in that are Chinese Canadian, and it plays into, their working class situation. But it's a very matter of fact sort of thing. And for the Shadow List in particular, it was an experiment for me in terms of voice. Would I be allowed to write poems where I don't ever say if my narrator is what race she is? It's not something I ever mention. But for me, it was, I wanted her to be messy. I wanted her to make decisions that, the reader would be reading and be like, no, don't do that. Don't say hi to that guy. And I wanted them to know that those kinds of, like white female poets have been writing really messy kind of love poems or really messy kind of sexual poems for a long, long time. Mm-hmm. And I just didn't feel that Asian women were given that elasticity of theme as much. And so I really wanted to try. What's that?
Where on the flip side, it's actually our reality.
It actually is. The fetishization of Asian women is such a big thing. And I think that the Shadow List really touches on the fetishization of our bodies, really, without ever saying so. And I think that the reader has to do a little bit of work to sort of make that connection. But I'm sort of like at the point in my career where it matters to me that I want my readers to do a little bit of work. I think when I was like 25, I was like, no, I'll give you all the answers. Here are all the answers. I'm so worried you're going to run away from my book. But, I've been around for a while now, and I don't mind the idea of a reader trying a little more. And I feel like I'm in a position now where I can ask them to try a little more, and I know that in a lot of like sort of Canadian literature spaces, I have, some privilege because I've been around for a while. So I think then it's my responsibility to push the envelope in terms of what Asian women are allowed to write or what readers will accept from us.
You're blazing the path for us, man.
Okay. It's not quite that dramatic, but if you want to say that, that's fine. I'm just writing some poems.
You know what? I've been thinking a lot about representation over the past 2 days after I finished your book. And then I kind of like dove back into my childhood. And like, I grew up in Oakville, Ontario. Okay. In the 1990s, Oakville, Ontario, very white bread suburb. And then I moved to Shanghai for 8 years. And that was a culture shock.
Yeah.
For me.
I bet. Yeah.
But I went back to like the movies that I was watching, and Charlie's Angels, that was one of my favorite movies of all time because Miss Lucy Liu blazed the path. And when it comes to writing, I'm like, I honestly, you are blazing the path. So thank you.
Oh, well, that's really nice of you to say. It's not just me though, and then I should totally like
Others.
acknowledge the female writers who came before me, like Evelyn Lau is one of the most underrated Asian Canadian writers, and Sky Lee and Larissa Lai. I'm sure I'm missing somebody. Lydia Kwa. I could name a lot of women that I really admire, and I want to say actually that Disappearing Moon Cafe by Sky Lee, if you haven't read it, that to me busts the door down so that we were not just writing about like sad mahjong games and like dumplings. And so, yeah.
Toilet Club was really wonderful.
I love that book.
I love it still.
I actually really do. And Amy Tan is so badass and wonderful. But that's not the only version of our story. That's all.
No, it's true. Actually, I wanted to read. I'm so glad that you read Infestation as one of the first poems, actually the first poem, because when I was reading it, dried cloud ear fungus hidden behind the coats in the closet. 2 days ago, I was standing in the green fresh down the road from me, staring up at the white fungus, thinking to myself, why is it such a massive bag? Where am I going to put it in my kitchen? And then my girlfriend texts me and goes, why don't you put it in your front hall closet?
That is such a Chinese thing to say. Put it beside your coats. It'll be fine. It'll taste better that way.
Moths won't get it. No big deal. Moving on, though, I do feel like this matter-of-fact existence weaves its way through your children's books, too. You know, like I was thrilled to see Animals of Chinese New Year, and like Chinese New Year, a celebration for everyone. Like, you know, when I moved back to Canada, I didn't have a lot of Asian friends, actually. I'm just, you know, I lived in Toronto. I was in the fine art industry. It's not very Asian run. It's very white run. But I had a lot of really great friends who were open to learning about Chinese New Year, and then fell in love with the traditions of Chinese New Year. And I started giving them little hongbao, little red packets. And one of them was like trying to find a ferry in Vancouver, actually, and forgot that he had no cash, and then reached into his coat and pulled out the hongbao with the $8 that I had put in there for him, and he had the perfect fare for the ferry. But it's, you know, I'm thrilled to see representation and more of it. And you're one of many writers in Canada who are starting to write more stories and diverse stories for children. And I would have died for that as a kid. You know, I hardly had any representation. So I want to ask you to tell our audience a bit more about the reason that you started writing children's novels and the reason you continue to write them.
Yeah, like, I mean, when I was younger, and, you know, you go through this thing as a writer when you're, you know, when you're doing events and stuff, and people will always ask you, what is the book that shaped you as a child? And for me, it was always Harriet the Spy or Anne of Green Gables or The Secret Garden or whatever. Nobody like me in any of those books, right? Nobody looks like me, nobody with parents like mine. And I started thinking about, like, what kind of things do I want my son to see? He's 11 now. And I started thinking, like, what are the myths that, or the stories, or the, like, the folk tales that the only way I knew about them was because my grandparents and my parents told them to me. They were never in our media. They were never, you know, they were never an NFB short. You know, like, we got to see the Log Drivers Waltz 5,000 times, but, like, did we ever know what the Chinese heritage was of our neighbors and friends?
For a lion dance, you know?
Just a lion dance. It could be on a log. That'd be fine too.
That'd be fine.
That'd be great. Throw in some maple syrup, and it'd be like a nice hybrid situation. But sure. But it was, so that was where I sort of go with that. And then also, like, you know, the children's books that I was reading when I was growing up did not reflect my reality. I grew up in East Vancouver in a working class neighborhood, extremely diverse, like so diverse I couldn't even, like, express. Like, if there were, like, waspy people, it was the exception. Like, we were very much, like, you know, a lot of the dads worked down at the dock, a lot of the mums, you know, gardened, and they'd exchange, like, arugula and bok choy over the back fence, and no one spoke English, but that's fine. They were all friends anyway. And I felt like this version of childhood could be as compelling as, you know, the New York City of Harriet the Spy, right? Like, why not? Because for me, it was somewhat magical, those sorts of moments. And also, like, the last book that I published, Finding Home, about immigration and refugees and displaced persons and stuff. That one was really important for me because there was a period of time there where migration was a big topic in the news, and people were talking about legal and illegal migrants and things, and in ways that were not actually real. Like, it's not facts. And I thought, children don't know the difference, right? They see it on the news and they're going to be, that person's illegal and therefore bad. But the reality is it's never illegal to seek asylum, to look for safety and security. So I wanted to write that book to just be like really matter of fact about it. Listen, this is what the United Nations Refugee Agency says, and we should listen to them. They know what they're talking about. And this is, so that was really important for me. And also to build a sort of like empathy for children. I think children often are quite empathetic anyway, but I think what's harder for them to understand are people who look a bit different, or who, maybe have an accent or whatever. And I just really wanted to make sure that they understand that everybody actually at their core wants the same thing, which is security and safety and happiness. And that's, once everybody understands that, it seems to be fine. But anyway, that was my whole thing with the kids' books. Sorry, that's my dog agreeing with me.
I love it. I'm obsessed with dogs. I want one eventually.
You should get one. Yeah, dogs are great.
Actually, my partner has to finish his PhD first, one thing at a time. It's quite intense, that whole thing.
Wise, very wise.
Oh God, your dog distracted me and I lost my train of thought.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Stop it, Rosie.
That's absolutely okay. Yeah. Oh, what I was going to say actually is, yeah, your children's books have a strong political message to them, which is very important. I think, start them young. Yes. But it's also, they're beautifully illustrated.
Yeah. I'm so lucky. Finding Home, I think I have it here. If people want to look at the cover, is illustrated by Drew Shannon, the artist Drew Shannon. And it's just the cutest cover I've ever seen in my life. Have you ever seen anything so cute?
It's welcoming. I love that,
Yeah.
And that's what the whole immigration system, I say system, it's not really a thing, but it's like the program through the United Nations and that whole, the concept of seeking asylum. My father sought asylum here, and that is part of it. It's that welcoming aspect.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Which is what I think defines a lot of the, that's the other thing about Canada, and in particular, and our refugee policies. They could always be better, but the welcoming aspect is one of the things that I think distinctly makes Canada Canadian.
Mm-hmm.
If people are looking for a definition, this place we call Canada anyway.
Yeah. I want to go back to the shadow list real quick, and I want to talk about the different sections.
Yeah. I better look to see if I can remember how many sections there are.
You've got 3. Well, you've got the introduction. I actually count as its own section. Okay. That reminded me very much of Ian Williams and how he has that one poem that goes throughout his entire book. I mean, fabulous. I'm starting to love that, the multi-page single poem with only a few lines, because it's, it's half blank space, half narrative. Mm-hmm. But I do want to talk about, you've got part 1, part 2, and part 3. Without giving too much away, because readers should go and pick up a book and experience it themselves. How did you conceptualize the different parts of the book?
Yeah, you know what? There was always, these part divisions always existed. I don't think they were ever really that different as soon as I knew it was going to be a book anyway, except there was a 4th part that my editor, the lovely Paul Vermeersch, asked me to cut, and he was definitely correct. It was not that good, and that's fine.
Part of the shadow list.
There was the shadow of the shadow list. It shall never see the light of day, is what we're saying. But there was a 4th part, but the 4th part was kind of a throwaway part, and I'm glad we got rid of it. But the way that it works, the way it's mostly laid out here in terms of order and like division is, I think, the way it had been for most of that time. And I was, there's a part 1 for me are these sort of like shorter poems. They're kind of, they're a bit easier, I guess, they're less daunting, I think, than some of my longer poems can be. And then part 2 are these poems of really long lines. The narrator is really going through some stuff. She's making some of those decisions that may not be super great. And she's, going through her life. And then the 3rd part for me was a little bit more outward, where, I'm writing poems for my old dog, for example, or like for some of my friends. And because I wanted to sort of have my narrator go on this journey where she, the way out of the shadows, as it were, if she wanted to emerge, is basically community in some ways, and to look outward instead of constantly looking inward. I needed to give her a bit of a break, but also like the reader too, right? Those really long poems in part 2, I'm asking a lot. No, seriously though, I'm asking a lot from the reader, and I wanted it to, at the end, for my narrator to have a bit of lightness, and look outward instead of constantly inward. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that, because that is how it feels, and I wanted readers to hear that concept. How long did it take you to write this collection?
I think I started writing some of the earliest poems, gosh, probably 2014-ish. And then I was only writing them because, so my son was really little then, and I didn't have like great pockets of time to like start a new novel. That was one of the main things, is I only had like, the afternoon nap might last 45 minutes. So what are you going to do? So I started writing these poems because I'm always writing anyway. Like, even if it's stuff that's not going to go anywhere, I feel really bereft if I'm not writing, even if it's just little things.
I feel that. Yep.
Yeah. So then I started writing these poems, and then I just kept writing them, and they were quite cohesive. Like, the voice was the same. The settings were very much the same. There was a lot of like overlapping themes and sort of similar kinds of like circular logic, and the narrator was so consistent. So I just at some point, I must have been about 2017, I started thinking of it as a book. And then I started like asking people to help me read it. Will you read this poem, please? I know it's 6 pages long, and I'm so sorry, but please, will you read this poem?
Every poet needs a reader.
Yeah.
My poor best friend. I actually want to turn the Q&A session to the crowd now, the audience. This is a live event after all, and if we were in a live space, aka 2 years ago, I'd be turning to all of you and asking if anyone had any burning questions for Jen.
Do you miss that? Do you miss that? Being able to say, yes, the person in the back in the red shirt.
I never got that opportunity. Everything that I've done has been since the pandemic started. I'm like,
I hope you get that opportunity. It's actually kind of fun.
Wait, Sean, take notes, okay? Okay, we've got a question from Mary, actually. And the question is, how did you first get published?
Oh, like my first book, or the first
Let's do
book?
both. Let's do your very first publication ever.
Yeah.
I know you remember it. We all remember it.
Yeah.
And the very first book.
My first real publication, like not the school newspaper, was in the Claremont Review. I believe it was 1994. I was 18 years old. And Claremont Review is a youth literary magazine that is published out of Victoria. And it's like a national like literary journal and everything. It's like a real publishing credit. And I was 18 years old, and my high school creative writing teacher, Allison Sullings, who I am still in contact with, suggested I send this particular poem called Nerve Impulse. You see that? I even know the title of this poem. And and I sent it, and they published it. And it was really, this is back in the day, like I stuffed it in an envelope with a self-addressed stamped envelope for them to return it to me. And I put it in the mail, like with a letter and everything. And they got back to me 6 months later. It took forever. And then the journal came out, 6 months after that. And they sent me a copy in the mail. And then for my first novel, this is before not before the internet, but they were not accepting submissions via email, and agents and editors didn't have websites. Like they just didn't. So I went to like a directory, I think, or the Quill Inquirer at the library. I was definitely at the public library in Vancouver, and I made notes of the agents that I thought would be interested. There also weren't that many agents. So at the time, this was probably 2004-ish. And I sent query letters and a sample to 5 of them in the mail, again, with a self-addressed stamped envelope for its eventual return. And I waited weeks and weeks, and 2 agents actually phoned me and one of them was Carolyn Swayze, and I ended up signing with her because the other agent was going off on maternity leave and couldn't do it. And then Carolyn, I was with her until about a year or 2 years ago, and she retired. And now the other agent who went on maternity leave is now my agent now. So I've only ever had the contact with 2 agents, Samantha Haywood. So ever in my life.
Amazing, actually.
Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, so with the first novel, I think Carolyn took about maybe 6 months to it. No, it was probably about a year. She was probably submitting it for a year until Knopf picked it up. I was very fortunate not to have to be privy to all the rejections.
Bless her.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got another question, but I just want to backtrack real fast. So your first publication ever was a poem.
Mm-hmm. My first probably 10 were I only wrote poems up until I was like 24.
And now you've got your debut collection.
There you go. Full circle.
Full circle. Okay, next question is from Sean Wilson. Are there themes that work better as poems than prose, or things you can say in a poem that would be difficult to include in a novel or story? Great question.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so the thing about like these poems for me, they were like an exercise in voice. In a novel, you know, you need a little bit more omniscience than what I was writing in the shadow list, and you need a bit of more going to want to see where they are. They want to know what the weather's like. They want to see what everyone's wearing. They want, like, you know, details, right? And there's a lot of stuff in a novel. And then for me with these poems, because it was such an exercise in voice for me, there were a lot of things accessible when someone's speaking directly, like emotions, let's just say, or sensory experiences that are not quite as accessible in a novel. Like a novel's never going to be so tightly focused on voice. I mean, it could be, and if someone wants to write that novel, please send it to me and maybe I'll publish it. But like for me anyway, novels are not like that. And
Take
novels,
notes, guys.
yeah, novels for me are very much like an amalgamation of 5 or 6 ideas that seem connected. You know, they may not be connected to another person, but they're connected to me in my head. Whereas for me, these poems are very, like, so tightly focused, like very singular in some ways.
That is the beauty of poetry, I find. That, you know, there is a sort of a zoning in that, I don't know. I'm not a novelist, though. I don't know if I ever have that capacity.
Well, a novel, okay, you know what a novel's like? It's like a movie, right?
Yeah.
And then like a poetry collection is more like a
short.
Yeah, like a documentary short subject.
Like a real short.
Yeah. Real precise.
Yeah. And then a flash fiction is somewhere in between.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have any other questions from the audience? Yes. This is from Courtney. I wonder if you could describe the poetry scene in Vancouver. Seymour Payne, who was here a few weeks ago, provided a rich description of Montreal's poetry scene.
Oh, the poetry scene in Vancouver. Well, there are a lot of poets in Vancouver. There are a lot of writers in Vancouver, actually, in general. I find the poetry scene in Vancouver to be really fun. There are a lot of poets from different backgrounds, like cultural backgrounds. So like the BIPOC community writers is really, really strong there. We have, like, I'm just thinking even about just writers who've had poetry collections out this season, like Selena Bowen, Dallas Hunt, and then others from before, like recent ones like David Lee or Shazia Hafiz Ramji. You know, all of these writers who are doing something really cool and really new, and especially, and then we do have a lot of poets too who identify as queer or non-binary. You know, we've got like Jay Simpson, Amber Dawn, just really fascinatingly diverse group of writers, which I really, really love. Everybody's writing something very different. Like you have people who are writing like lyrical poetry, you have people who are writing like, you know, experiments with erasure. You have people who are, everyone's doing something really, really different. Everyone's experimenting with language. And the really interesting thing for me about Vancouver's poetry scene is that the BIPOC writers will often use words from other languages. And that is so exciting. Like for me, like this to me is like my best dream made tangible into a book. So yeah, so I think it's really cool. And then there are a lot of events in Vancouver too, like a lot of reading series, which back in the day you could go to
Oh,
meet
no.
people.
No.
And then you also get like some of our elders will often show up at these things, like like Fred Waugh. I met him at one of these things, and George Bowring, and like all of Daphne Marlatt, like Betsy Warland. I mean, come on now, you get to meet your elders, the people whose poems you've been reading for years. So yeah, that's what I would say Vancouver's poetry scene is like.
Also has incredible literary magazines.
Yes.
There are multiple that stem out of Vancouver. Yeah.
A lot of writers there. What are you going to do?
Publish great work.
Yeah.
All right. Anyone else got a question or two? We're actually like really good on time. I like didn't plan this properly. I usually fly, but maybe that's the poet in me. I always am too short.
No, short is good. Everyone's publishing real short books now. Have you seen, like, for example, a history of my brief body, Billy Ray Belcourt? It's so short. The essay collection.
I actually sat down with them to talk about it for Ottawa's Writers Fest, and then I finally got my copy the other day. I'm like so stoked about it because
Ellen has to go get it.
I have to get it because of this mushroom. And he actually pointed it out when we were talking to each other about it. But like, I read it as a digital thing, and so I never got to hold it. Like I got to hold. Luckily, yours came. Mm-hmm. It was a whole thing, but I got it.
So short books are good books.
Thank goodness. That's good for me. I've got a manuscript out there in the world, and it's short. So fingers crossed. Mary asks, what would you recommend for young writers trying to break in today?
I want you to write what compels you to write, first of all. I want you to, like, whatever it is that puts your butt in the seat, that's what you're going to write. You're going to follow the narrative thread that compels you, the one that's drawing you forward. I would also say that I love to see emerging writers establish sustainable writing practice. And what I mean by sustainable is making sure that you're not forcing yourself to write at a time that's not good for you. Like when I was younger, I would force myself to write like at night because that was the only time I had. And I would not recommend that to anybody. It's not sustainable. So making sure that you find a writing practice that works for you and your life, because your life matters too. And also the other thing is just really important is community. Community is so important. So when the world opens up again, and going to events in person, it's really important to be able to meet other people, like just people who are at your stage of the process, or people who are further along. And I don't like to use the term networking because it feels like a burden, and it's scary. Like the word networking is scary. What I mean is that it's really nice to make friends, and those friends are going to be the people that you turn to later when your manuscript's ready to be read by someone and you need some feedback, or those friends are going to be maybe publishing an anthology or editing an anthology, and they think, hey, your work is a really good fit for the themes that we're exploring. So there's a reciprocity, and then you're able also to give whatever you can give into the community too. So those three things I think are really, really important. You can Google like how to write a query letter, how to find an agent, how to send something to an editor, and like those things are easily learnable, but like I think these sort of like intangibles are really important, and we shouldn't forget them.
I'm agreeing 100%. Mm-hmm. And if you're based in Ottawa, Mary as well, Ottawa has an incredibly supportive writing community. So when the lockdown ends in Ontario and we're all vaccinated, get in touch with us, come out. There's literally an event, or there used to be, and Sean knows this too, happening like every single night. I once triple booked myself in Ottawa, which Toronto did not think that would be possible, but it was. Okay, Courtney asks, are there any specific obstacles that female presenting Asian Canadian writers can expect to face that male presenting or white writers do not?
Well, yeah, for sure. I think that oftentimes, I mean, I don't know, it doesn't happen to me as much anymore, but I think it happens because I'm older now. But I think for younger writers, it does happen. Like, no one ever actually thinks you're the author when you show up at an event. They just never do. I don't know who they think you are, but they don't ever think you're the author. And they always look really surprised when you say, hi, my name is Jen, I'm reading tonight. Oh, there's a lot of that. I think that the other thing is that you will always be asked about race, and you will always be asked about identity. And you will often be asked to do things like speak on diversity in publishing, whether you want to or not. And you will often be asked to speak on the politics surrounding your identity, whether you want to or not. And I would say, don't do it if you feel the pressure. Do it because you want to, or don't do it, and that's fine too. There's no one way to approach that, and no one way to, be an Asian woman walking through the world. And I do think that initially the sort of like diversity of our narratives were not being represented in what was being published. We were being slotted into this Drolet Club situation, as much as I love the Drolet Club. That's opening up now, I think. The other thing, though, to watch out for, I think, is in the editing process. So I think I'm working on my 10th publishing contract, and I've only ever had one editor of color. So I think this is something with how many publishers now? I don't know, 6, 7. So that's something to look out for, because there will be times when you feel like your interests are not perhaps being met, that your editor may not quite get what you're doing, or that further on in the process with like publicity and stuff, you may feel that some of these things that you're being asked to do, events or interviews or whatever, are exploitative, and that does happen too. So those are all the things that I would say to watch out for. And also, like, watch out for like, any of those things. And then like also like with events and stuff, people will sometimes ask you really invasive questions about who you are, and you don't have to answer them. That's my advice to you. You don't have to answer them. Shut it down. It's okay.
I'm going to piggyback off that. How have you found, like, what sort of tactics? I'm asking for me now.
I usually make jokes. That's my tactic, but like not everybody wants to do that, and that's fine. So like somebody asked me not long ago, a couple of years ago, asked me like how much of your it's so funny, how much of your Chinese heritage contributes to your writing, and I said 17%. All right, moving on.
I love that.
Yeah, I know. It's like you just make it like I don't have patience for that. Yeah, how much? I don't know. Like, do I have an internal identity calculator? I don't.
I'm taking notes over on the side here.
Like, and so generally that's what I would say. And then somebody else once asked me, like, don't you find that your work is derivative of Evelyn Lau's? And I said, no, I actually don't think so, but you clearly do. So maybe you should answer the question.
Ooh, right.
Yeah, shut it down.
Anyone else? Anyone else got a burning question for Jen? We are actually almost at our end now. I have room for one more question if anyone wants to ask it, and then I'm going to ask Jen to read from her book again.
Don't be shy. I know I was talking about shutting down questions, but it only happens like once every 5 years. Don't worry about it.
Can I ask the typical question? Because I'm actually very interested.
Yeah.
What's next? Are you going to write a second collection of poetry? Are you working on that novel of spec fic that never saw the light of day?
Yeah, what's next, eh? Okay, so I have a collection of memoir essays that's coming out next year. So that's in edits currently, called Super Fan, and it's about my relationship with pop culture and how it defined me as a person. And then I'm working on a horror hybrid literary novel.
Ooh.
There's demons, like demons with long skinny tongues and weird things.
Like Castlevania-ish?
What's that?
Like Castlevania-ish?
Kind of, but like I'm going for more of like, the movie The Ring, that kind of, but the Korean version obviously, but like, yeah, like that kind of vibe.
Yes.
Yeah.
Fill your eyes out. All right. Thank you for sitting with us tonight, Jen.
You're welcome.
There's one last one.
All right.
One last burning question. What's on your nightstand right now?
It's I actually just finished it. It's Satellite Love by Genki Ferguson. Genki's first novel, and it's about there are several protagonists in it, but then I would say the main protagonist is a young girl. She's probably about 16, named Anna, who falls in love with a satellite in the sky, and she names him Leo. It's really nice. It's good. It's a good book.
Really cute.
It's real cute. Yeah.
Satellite Love. I'm gonna have to write that down because that sounds like, I don't know. I just restarted Harry Potter because I sometimes like to read trash.
Yeah. We all have that compulsion sometimes.
Yeah, but Satellite Love, I'm gonna go on my list.
It's a really nice story, but there's like lots of pain and stuff in it too. But it's a really finely written, deliberately written, I would say.
All right. Can you read us 3 or 4 poems?
I'm gonna read you one long poem.
Yeah.
It's the last poem in the book, Stigmata. I like to end with this one sometimes.
All right.
Here we go. You have the mark of a witch. Turn your palms up, look closely at the middle. There, a star, a stigmata from a past life when you were thrown into a winter cold river, left to sink if you were merely human, dragged out and hung for evil if you floated. The rapids were vicious, yet in your fists were sprigs of rosemary that you tore from the bush as the men carried you out of your cottage and through the garden. For memory, you thought, so they will not forget their shame. As you drowned, the jagged, woody ends pierced the skin on your palms, and you saw the blood swirl upward to the surface. White swells, red wisps that spun like baby hair and then were gone. You listen to the woman who claims she has the sight. She asks, "Are you a conjurer?" And you say to your surprise, "Yes." There were the imagined men you wrote into poems who then became real. There was the restlessness you wrote into your novel, and when your marriage died, you wondered what you had called into being. There is your father, your grandfather, and especially your grandmother. Once, well past midnight, you opened your eyes, and the neighbor's porch light spilled over the edge of the bed. It was here your grandmother sat, perched like a gargoyle slowly coming to life. By then, she had been dead for 25 years. She said, "They never knew me. They thought I was cruel." Silent, you watched her cry transparent tears. You wondered if you should touch her, but you knew that your hand would open and close and grasp nothing at all. In the morning, you couldn't remember how she had left. Maybe she walked. Maybe she faded away. Maybe she kissed your forehead before flying out the window, nimble and weightless. Cradling your hands in her lap, the seer asks another question. Do you get everything you want? You hesitate. No. But yes? She looks at your face, eyes following the lines of your mouth, set hard in your jaw. Did he hurt you? Does he scare you? And you don't bother answering because you both already know. He hurt you many times on purpose and by accident. The intent never mattered. You resolve to write a poem that wishes him away, a place where the desert grows truncated pine trees, bushes that are gray-green against the dust rising every time a car passes on the 2-lane highway. He'd like it there. As far as the eye can see, he will be the tallest one. In the cramped living room, her 3-year-old dancing to a cartoon on the television behind you, she traces your lifeline with her fingernail. So many slashes here and here. She takes a sip of water and then, "Were you a child? What happened?" Before you can reply, she whispers, "I'm so sorry." She turns your hand to the side. There is another marriage in your future. She smiles. This time you will be happy. He has been waiting for you. Someone is smoking weed in an upstairs bedroom, and you blink against the smell. "Well," you say, "where can I find this man?" She passes you a slice of apple taken from a plastic container shaped like a bunny's head and laughs. "You're the witch. You tell me." And that's the end of that guy.
That's one of my favorite poems.
Thank you.
Thank
I
you
just
so
made
much.
a noise with my straw, sorry.
Thank you so much, Jen, for sitting down with me today and like answering so honestly and like going through basically your writing life with us.
Thank you, Ellen.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to turn now to thank all of you who are with us tonight. If you haven't picked up a copy of the Shadow List yet, please do through indigo.ca or through your local independent or even through the publisher, Wilsick and Wynn. Do they ship internationally? I feel like they do.
I think they must.
They must.
I'm gonna say, go on a limb and say yes.
Check them out either way. Pick one up. You won't regret it. And thank you for joining us tonight. I think that's it.
Thank you, everybody. That was awesome, Ellen. Thanks.
Thank you.